Our guest for the day, for the night, for the evening is one that covers Toronto. Has been covering for a long time. The world famous John Molinaro.
World famous. Oh, geez. Appreciate that.
We appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks for
Thanks,
having me
John.
on. I appreciate the
Absolutely.
invite.
So y'all are coming off of a bit of a heartbreaker. Um, yeah, I feel like it's polar opposites. This first week, you didn't really have any teams that came away with draws. So it was heartbreak for some and elation for others. But just kind of tell us how was everybody feeling up there now?
Um, I think there was a sense of when, Toronto threw away that game against DC. And let's be honest, they threw away the game because, they go up 2-1 in the 83rd minute. After a pretty lifeless opening 45 minutes, I thought they looked much stronger in the second half. Mark Anthony Kaye scores in the 83rd minute to make it 2-1. And the sense was, yeah, okay, this is great. This is a nice comeback win on the road. And Toronto only won twice away from BMO Field last year. But then they throw it away. And I think it was the way that the game sort of unfolded for them. Over the last 2 years, whether it was under Bob Bradley or Chris Armas or Javier Perez, Toronto has a knack of throwing good points out after bad late in games. I think last year they conceded in the 85th minute or later 5 times, which ended up costing them about 9 points. Now that wouldn't have mattered much in the grand scheme of things. They still wouldn't have qualified for the playoffs. But I think it just speaks to their bit of a problem in terms of closing games out. And it's the last thing you want on the opening day of the season, right? Just to have these old problems rearing their ugly heads again. So, amongst the fan base here, there's a lot of sort of, I wouldn't call it disenfranchisement because it's way too early in the season, but just a lot of, oh God, here we go again. Like, we can't sort of, the club can't sort of close things out on what's going on. So I think, reporters like myself and who cover the team on a regular basis and my colleagues, we're quite anxious to see what happens in Atlanta on the weekend because, Atlanta obviously was on the other end of the spectrum, scoring late twice to get the win. And so Mercedes-Benz Stadium isn't the easiest place for visiting teams to pick up points. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see how Toronto responds, after that heartbreaking loss against DC.
Now, I do have a quick question, just because we kind of rushed you in here, but just to give everybody a bit of a background that may not know you. Obviously, this is mostly Atlanta United folks, but just give everybody kind of your background on covering the team and where your work can be located at and everything else.
Sure. So I've been a long-time Canadian soccer journalist since 1999. And I've been a day one beat reporter for TFC pretty much since 2007. There was a small interruption during 2019 and started halfway through 2019 into 2020. But other than that, covering the team on a full-time basis since 2007. And so I've worked for Sportsnet, which is one of the big all sports TV channels up here. I worked for CBC, which is kind of the Canadian equivalent of the BBC in England. And right now I run my own sort of paywall website called TFC Republic, which is at tfcrepublic.ca. And it's just strictly coverage of Toronto FC on a full-time basis with a little coverage of the Canadian men's and women's teams thrown in as well.
I'm a big hockey fan, so I see a lot of Sportsnet.
There you go. There you go.
Well, yeah, John, again, we definitely appreciate you coming on. I'm sure you have a lot of perspective on TFC, having covered them essentially since day one. Just going back to Saturday, the loss is one thing, of course, but then hanging over that is the injury to Insigne. And from what I'm hearing, it's trending toward him not being available on Saturday and potentially much longer. So twofold question on that. What's the latest that you're hearing up there about his potential status for Saturday, the severity of his injury, and then second part of that question, who can step in if he's out for an extended period of time?
Yeah, so he limped off in the 34th minute against DC United with what the club is calling like a lower leg injury. I was at practice on Tuesday, and he didn't train with the team. He didn't train with the team as well today. So the fact that he hasn't been in training at all this week would seem to me suggest that he's not going to be available to play on Saturday. The club told us on Tuesday at practice that he underwent a medical evaluation to sort of determine the extent of the injury. And so we'll get a full update tomorrow on Thursday as to, just how long he'll be out of action. So it's really kind of in a holding pattern. We really don't know in terms of whether this is kind of like a long-term injury or a short-term injury. If what it's true is that they're saying it's a lower leg and we're talking about something like a calf or something like that, then, I would think it wouldn't be a long-term deal, right? I mean, if it was something related to the knee or thigh, those usually tend to, take a little bit longer. So, but we don't know. So we'll get a better idea on Thursday. In terms of long-term replacements, they're going to have to turn to their bench. And quite frankly, Toronto doesn't have a great deal of depth at the moment. They might have to turn to someone like Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy. He's a 18 or 19-year-old Canadian who very promising prospect, but nowhere near the level of Lorenzo Insigne. And he's, Jaquil is still sort of in his, developmental stage, right? He's not the finished article. And it's a lot to ask of someone like him to fill into that spot. They might turn to someone like Ayo Akinola, the Canadian international who replaced Insigne in the Atlanta game. He's more of a traditional number 9, but as you saw against DC, he had to fill in for Insigne. And I thought he actually did okay. He had a couple of chances, rung the post with a long-range shot in the second half and in the first half. And look, at times he stretched the DC back line. So, but again, he's not a Lorenzo Insigne. I mean, this is a guy with Champions League experience and, has won, a European championship with Italy. So I don't think there's any question that, Bob Bradley is sweating this a little bit. And the fear is that, hopefully from his perspective is that Insigne won't be out long-term. As I said, we'll get a better idea on Thursday.
And it's silly to rush anybody back from injury, in game 2 of the season.
No, absolutely. And, he had, even before he came to Toronto last summer, he was coming off a full season in Serie A with Napoli in Serie A. And his sort of debut for TFC was delayed somewhat because he was carrying a little bit of a knock. So, they were cautious back then to get him into the lineup. And I think, as you pointed out quite rightly, it's just the first game into the season. I don't think they're in a position to rush him into the lineup, even with the lack of depth that they're dealing with. This is a valuable asset to them, right? This is the most expensive player in the league, and they're not going to risk, prolonging his absence by getting him back into the starting lineup unless he's 100%.
Yeah. So the other end of the pitch, because obviously Insigne is going to be like the big, I think, news going into this weekend,
sure,
as he should be. Going back to what you said, the highest paid player in the league. So you've got to be careful with him. But Toronto also brought in another goalkeeper in the offseason coming from New York, and Sean Johnson. So and also he's got a little bit of history down here as well. So but what's kind of been his impact just in the short time that he's been there?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think you can hang any of the 3 goals against DC on him, right? You have to keep in mind too that he's playing essentially in front of a completely retooled back line. Aside from Johnson, Toronto went out and got a new left back this sort of offseason, Raul Petretta, who played in Turkey and Switzerland previously. They signed another high-profile free agent, Matt Hedges, the longtime FC Dallas captain and former MLS Defender of the Year. And they went out and got Sigurd Rosted, who is a Norwegian international who last played with Brøndby. And, he would have played against Bob Bradley when he coached Stabæk in the Norwegian First Division. So, 4 of the back 5 are new people. Sean Johnson is playing in front of a, completely retooled defense. So I appreciate, for me, he's been probably the most important offseason addition because I don't think there's any question Toronto FC needed to upgrade at the goalkeeping position this offseason. And other than Andre Blake, who's a better goalkeeper in MLS, I would, I think it's Sean Johnson. But I do think it'll take him time to settle in, not through any fault of his own, just because, the back 4 is completely new to him. The back 4 are new to each other as well. So I think patience is required. So I think it'll be interesting to watch, what kind of impact Sean has, in the weeks ahead.
What do you think it took Toronto FC so long to sign him? Was it his age? I mean, granted, he's had a terrific career at MLS, and to take nothing away from that, but did that play into it, or contract
No,
demands? He
no,
ended up in a TAM deal. Or
no. You
what
know
played
what it
into that?
was? No, it was because of Sean Johnson himself. So they actually approached him, fairly early in the free agency period after the end of the season, because obviously, they knew they had to get an upgrade on the goalkeeping position. And he told Toronto point blank, "Look, I'm going to Qatar for the World Cup. I want to
Yeah.
sort of focus on that. Once we get back from the World Cup, then we can sort of begin talks." And it really didn't happen until the new year, until January. Him and his longtime girlfriend came up and visited Toronto, got to see the training facility. Toronto TFC does, I have to hand it to them. They do a really good job of sort of going after and recruiting players, especially free agents, because they get the families involved, right? They did the same thing with Matt Hedges. They brought him and his kids up. They took him to a Maple Leafs game when he was here. For Sean, they took him to a Raptors game. He got to meet. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Drake, the big Toronto-based. Yeah. So he got to meet him. They pull out all the stops to go after they're after guys that they're recruiting. So, but yeah, in Johnson's case, it was he was dictating matters. He wanted to delay things until after the World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
I've been seeing Sean Johnson a lot on commercials. I don't know if it's been popping up for other people, but it's still him in the NYFC kit playing goalie. But like I've been seeing it nonstop on YouTube. Nobody?
I haven't seen any of that, so I'll take your word for it.
Next time I find, I'll take a screenshot and send it to everybody. But it seems like he's getting advertised a lot.
Yeah, it's well it should. It's well he should be. I mean, he's one of the best keepers in the league. But we talked about Insigne earlier, but we have to talk about the other Italian, Bernardeschi, who came over last year as well, and really right away had an impact. 8 goals, 3 assists, just 13 matches. Scored from the spot on Saturday. So, how can Bernardeschi? He'll have all these expectations on him in 2023. How can you meet those expectations and exceed those expectations, really, based on what he's heard from Bob Bradley and what the expectation is from a TFC fan base and really all around MLS?
Yeah, I think, when he kind of came in last summer, he came in roughly at the same time as Insigne, and Bernardeschi, I think he was a little bit overshadowed, to be perfectly honest, because, Insigne, Bernardeschi was a member of the European Championship team as well, but Insigne was captain of Napoli. Bernardeschi hadn't really been playing regular football that year at Juventus, so all the attention was focused on Insigne. But I remember saying at the time, watch Bernardeschi. I mean, he's a little bit younger. I think he's 27, 28. This is a fun player to watch. I mean, he's an exciting, dynamic player. He can make things happen. And he's got such a great personality off the field, and it plays out on the pitch. And so you saw a bit of that last year. I mean, he was very vibrant in attack and really kind of added an element of danger, going forward that TFC badly needed. And I suspect that now he's had a full off season. He's had the benefit of a full preseason training camp with Toronto. His family are firmly embedded, living in Canada now in Toronto, dealing with our gloriously cold winter up here. I suspect that he's going to. There are big expectations on him this year, and I think he's going to live up to them. He's not sort of a player who kind of, shies away from responsibility. I mean, he's taken it squarely on his shoulders since he's got here, and he understands that he's one of the highest paid players in the league and that he has to produce. And I think he's going to. He'll sort of continue to do what he did last year, which was, create some pretty dynamic moments in the final third for TFC.
So, I mean, and I think to that point, you kind of saw a little bit of it last Saturday. I mean, he has flashes where he looks like he can take on an entire pitch. And I think that's what Toronto wanted, obviously, when they signed him, along with Insigne. But I think it's important for Atlanta fans to kind of, I think if we're going to draw a parallel, and we had a whole conversation earlier, but he kind of has that Luis Araujo kind of mentality. He is unafraid of taking on guys 1v1. Now, I'm not going to draw comparisons to the finishing because that's a totally different topic. But I think, for Atlanta fans who maybe don't watch Toronto as much, that would probably be one of your comparisons because they're very, they're just unafraid. They are, again, Bernardeschi is very quick, very fleet-footed, and I think that's going to be one of the more interesting matchups in the match this weekend. By the way, the commercial Tommy was referring to was Continental Tire commercial. So,
okay.
I know they filmed a bunch of those last season with different players, but yeah, so that's for anybody that was asking, it's a Continental Tire commercial.
You ever have like a thought where you like you say it as a fact, but then you start to wonder, like, did I dream this? That was the moment where I had where like nobody here knew it, and then all of a sudden the chat started saying, and I was like, okay,
right,
I'm good.
There you go. You're not going insane. So.
Thank you.
No, but I take your point about Bernardeschi. I mean, there is the term that I like to use is fearless. I mean, he goes at players without fear, and it's because he's played at Juventus, one of the top clubs in the world. He has Champions League experience. He has Europa League experience. He's won a Euro championship with the Italian national team. So of course he's going to go at guys and just sort of run at them and make things happen. And I think what's been impressive is, obviously his goal scoring ability, his crosses into the box have been great. But for me, what's really kind of stood out is he's already formed a very sort of effective relationship down the right side with Richie Larea, TFC's right fullback, Canadian international. They have really combined to great effect. And Larea came to the club. He was previously with TFC, sold to Nottingham Forest, and then he brought back on loan last summer and instantly formed great chemistry with Bernardeschi. So, Bernardeschi has this ability to sort of, draw out and bring out the best of his teammates. And I think that's like another quality in him.
Yeah. So, AJ kind of read my mind. And by the way, you mentioned the weather up there in Toronto. Being a former Buffalo resident who was up there a few months back for a Buffalo Bills game and paid a visit to Toronto as part of my trip, I can definitely emphasize with you. But
so you know,
absolutely, absolutely. But yeah. So AJ read my mind, and I have to ask you about Dio. Dio, of course, with LAFC for a couple of years, came into the league and really just scored goals left and right. Essentially, form leveled off, and we all know the story. He left the club. Now he's with TFC and back in MLS after several years away, including a stint back home in Norway. So my question to you is, what kind of drew TFC to Dio? What kind of led them to sign him? And how do you feel that he'll do as a striker, after having been away from MLS so long? And with his previous stops as LAFC, seems like he hasn't had much of an effect, if I'm not mistaken. So how do you feel that Dio can do with TFC?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, as you quite rightly said, he's kind of hasn't been in an MLS club for 2 years, and he's played back in Norway and I think in either Qatar or Saudi Arabia, one of those countries, and has really haven't sort of rediscovered his old form. So in that regard, it was a bit of a curious signing by TFC. But on the other hand, let's not discount, the history here. When he was at LAFC, he did really well. I mean, he busted out of the gate, and it was there that he played under Bob Bradley. He also played under Bob Bradley in Norway at Stabæk, which was when Bob really first saw him, and he did exceptionally well there. I mean, he was one of Stabæk's top players. So Bob has this, it's not a problem, but he has this knack of turning to players he's sort of used in the past or is familiar with, bringing them, back. Sigurd Rosted, another one who's, the Norwegian international, played it with Brøndby. He would have played against Bob during his time at Stabæk. So I think a large part of it is just Bob's familiarity with Adama Diomande in terms of knowing what he could do and, confident and feeling confident that he can get the best out of them. Whether Diomande can rise to the occasion, I mean, it remains to be seen. I mean, it's one game. Let's sort of reserve judgment until we got, a larger sort of sample size. Yeah. But I think the hope is that he can sort of rekindle his form at LAFC, where very similar to how TFC plays, who was playing in a front three with two very talented wingers, Carlos Vela, one of them, and really kind of thrived off that service. So I think the hope is that, Bob can sort of recreate that in some form and get the best out of Diamande again.
If he doesn't, and again, we don't want to make too many conclusions too early, but if he doesn't, where does LAFC, where does TFC turn next, really?
Yeah, I mean, like when you look at sort of the forward core, I mean, there's not a lot of depth there. It's, they just traded Jesus Jimenez to FC Dallas to get Brandon Servania because they were sort of lacking in midfield depth. So other than, Diamande, there's Ayo Akinola, who had a breakout season in 2020, but then, had injury problems and that hasn't been the same since. But he would be the first option off the bench. Beyond that, you're looking at guys like Jordan Peruzza and Hugo Mbog, who are young players who have very little MLS experience. So if something were to happen to Diamande or Akinola for that matter, I suspect that TFC would have to make a move, either in the transfer market or in the trade market and bring in a more experienced player. Let's not forget, they have an open DP slot, right? They only have 2 designated players right now. Mm-hmm. They've said, Bob Bradley and Bill Manning, the club's president, has said that, they're not going to go out and blow their brains out on another Insigne or Bernardeschi to fill that DP slot. But at some point, you'd have to think they're going to fill it, probably in the summer. And it wouldn't surprise me if it's going to be on a number 9 or another striker, someone who can potentially play between Bernardeschi and Insigne.
Yeah.
So you've kind of touched on a variety of guys, Sigurd Rosted being one of them, Matt Hedges. You guys got a lot of new folks, new faces.
Mm-hmm.
For, again, the Atlanta fans that maybe aren't as familiar with some of these names, I mean, I know you guys aren't either because some of them are so new.
Right.
But if you had to pick one player that needs to be kept an eye on from a fan perspective this Saturday, who would it be? Obviously, it can be one you've talked about already. I know Bernardeschi's maybe the obvious one, but who would it be and why?
You talking about the newcomers or just the team in general?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what, we'll make it 2-part. The newcomers and anybody that you want. Okay.
Of the newcomers, I would probably say Raul Petretta, the left back, who last played in Turkey and previously played in Basel. Not a perfect game from him in DC, but I thought overall very solid on both sides of the ball, pretty solid defender and very dangerous getting forward. And that was a big roster hole to fill for TFC after, the retirement of Domenico Crescito in the offseason for TFC. So the fact that they were able to get someone like Petretta, who again has Champions League experience playing with Basel, that was a big get. So I think of the newcomers, probably he's the guy to watch. Amongst the rest of the team, very hard to look past Bernardeschi. If it's not Insigne, then it's going to be Bernardeschi, just because he's of the remaining guys that are healthy and who will likely play, he's the most dangerous and most dynamic and lethal sort of player, and really can make things happen out of nothing. I mean, he conjures chances really out of nothing just through his own sort of individual brilliance. So I think he's someone on the right side of the front three that Atlanta fans should keep an eye on Saturday.
Yeah. So going back to Saturday just real quick, and you kind of answered this question already, so forgive me if we're going over the same thing again. But yeah, you mentioned last year TFC had that knack of losing late leads last season, and then it happened again on Saturday. Is the mindset among the fan base, considering what happened last year, is that it's maybe just a blip and what could otherwise be a resilient season as compared to last season's results? Or do you feel that it might be a sign of things to come if things don't get nipped in the bud rather quickly?
Again, it's one game, so I don't think, of course there's like a segment of any fan base, of any MLS team or any soccer team for that matter, who are, reactionary, knee-jerk. I mean, I can remember posting my game story on Saturday and posting a link on Twitter, and almost all the responses were Bradley out, Bill Manning has to be fired, the whole team has to be revamped. Right. We're 90 minutes into a season, guys. Let's just sort of tone it down a little bit. Let's kind of cool the temperature. But I mean, subsequently this week, I did write a column saying, look, not that this is, it's too early to say that this is a trending problem, this problem of conceding late, because it is one game, but it was a problem last year. And I think they have to nip this in the bud. They cannot let the rot sort of set in, because the more that they sort of let these games slip away from them late in contests, if this becomes a regular pattern early on, then they're going to find themselves in a hole pretty early. Let's not forget, because of the League's Cup this summer, the schedule is rather condensed, right? There's a lot of games that are front loaded. And so if they continue to drop points like this late in games, and, pretty soon they're going to find themselves in a big hole, and not with the same amount of time to dig themselves out of. So it's something that I think they have to be careful about going forward, definitely.
It sounds like this is going to make it an interesting game. Atlanta last year, I think, led the league in two interesting stats. One was goals allowed in the first, I think, 15 minutes, and then scoring goals in the last 15 minutes in stoppage. I mean, we should have been a lot worse than we were if it wasn't for some late game heroics.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that point up, because if I remember correctly, Toronto had like a bad habit of conceding early in the opening 15 to 20 minutes last year as well. And so that sort of made things even more difficult for them last year. And I think it was a major reason why they didn't make the playoffs. I mean, there's a whole slew of reasons, but that's just one of them.
And let's not forget, like the Atlanta and Toronto matches over the years, there's been some crazy ones.
They've been great, haven't they? Yeah.
Yeah, they've been fun. Are you coming down? Are you watching it from home?
I wish I would. I wish I was be able to come down. I covered the season ender during the 2017 season at Mercedes-Benz Arena. So that was the game. I think it was 1-1 it ended, or maybe it was 2-2. I can't remember. But that was the game where the league attendance record was broken, and TFC set the single season record for most points in an MLS campaign. So that was great. I mean, I absolutely fell in love with the stadium down there and the fans. It was a great atmosphere. Probably the best press meal box I've ever eaten as well.
Oh,
so that was nice. And I probably stuffed my face with Southern barbecue in the few days leading up to the game. So that was nice as well.
There you go.
But the games have been great. I mean, there's been some real sort of there's been goals in them, right? I mean, I can't remember a 0-0 draw even once. So they've been entertaining games, and I think both teams are kind of committed to kind of go at it, right? Since they've been in these games at each other. So it'll be interesting to see.
John, one of the things I'm curious about, because in Toronto, the Maple Leafs are king. So MLS season is starting while the Maple Leafs are on a playoff run. So what is the atmosphere at a Toronto FC game early season, and then after when the Toronto Maple Leafs lose in the first round?
Well, I mean, if past sort of seasons, it's sort of been like, once the Leafs are out of the way, then everyone's focus can sort of filter on to different things, right? I mean, the Raptors are kind of the exception because they're on their own entity, and they don't really have to suffer from with the Maple Leafs getting the majority of the spotlight. But TFC certainly does. I mean, there isn't, to be perfectly honest, there isn't much buzz in the city right now for TFC because their first two games are on the road. They're not going to play at home until March 18th. It's going to be miserably cold on that day, I would think. And so, and the Leafs are still, doing quite well. They're looking like a playoff contender. So it really doesn't sort of pick up until the team starts to play some home games, and really the Leafs are out of the picture. It's just the way the market is. I mean, I cannot stress how much of a hockey town this is. The Toronto Maple Leafs is the king of all sports franchises in the city. They garner up the majority of the sports coverage. I mean, there's probably, I'm probably not exaggerating, anywhere between 15 to 20 regular beat writers who cover the team from a variety of sports organizations. Toronto FC would love to have that sort of coverage. That's just the way it is, right? And so, but it's a problem at times because, especially, it wasn't a problem so much when TFC was winning, right? When they had that great run of 3 MLS Cups in 4 years, then, the media came out and it didn't matter what the Leafs were doing, people were paying attention. But the last 2 years, they haven't been a playoff team. And so they've lost a little bit of their relevance, and they're really fighting for relevance right now. And that's why this season is so critically important. They can't really afford another year of not making the playoffs, because I think that would just hurt them tremendously in this, very crowded sports market.
So I got to ask, because the season just started, we've had guests on leading up to the season, but you are the first that we've had on that specifically covers a team that Atlanta's playing against. So
Okay.
I want to ask, and it is completely okay, because I've been on podcasts before, opposition podcasts, where I gave my opinion, and I get it, it's the other team. But as far as score line or goals, who's scoring them, whatever, what do you think it comes down to? Who is it? Is it a lot of goals? Is it a just a lot of back and forth? What are your kind of predictions for the game?
I'm going to say a 2-1 win for Atlanta with probably, it's not an original thought, but I'll go with another brace from Almada. Just thought, obviously a great finish of the game yesterday, or on the weekend against San Jose. And, I think he's the hot player right now. I think when you look at the history of this series, aside from the playoff game in 2019, I don't think Toronto has won in Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. It's a tough, maybe they have, but I don't remember, but it's from a regular season perspective, but it's a tough place to play regardless of who the visiting team is, with that crowd and with the way that, Atlanta plays. So, and given TFC's, incredibly poor away record over the last 2 years, and the fact that Insigne probably isn't going to play, I don't see them getting a result. I really don't.
So you say 2-1. Who's the one for Toronto?
I'll say Bernardeschi. Again, not terribly original, but I think he'll sort of get at least one chance, maybe it'll come off a penalty shot, but I think he'll find the back of the net.
So one, and again, Sydney, you jump in. But this is another thing that we do with all of our guests. Atlanta doesn't come up to Toronto until April 15th, I believe. So Atlanta's got some solid traveling supporters. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, just kind of first thoughts, quick answer, whatever first comes to your mind about Toronto and what a fan could experience if they were to come up there.
Well, if they're coming up in April, it'll still be a little cold. It won't be dead of winter, like sort of, winter coat, but it's spring, and spring, it doesn't really warm up in Toronto until really late April, kind of May, and then obviously the start of summer in June. So I would say dress warmly, especially because it's not a dome stadium. BMO Field is an open air stadium, and it's right on the lake essentially. So, even on the best of nights, it can get a little chilly down at BMO Field. So dress warmly. I don't know. Other than that, I mean, look, Toronto is a very, I have kind of a love and hate relationship with the city, even though I've lived and worked here for 20 years. On the one hand, it's a frustrating city to live in because it's so go, 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 and people are so into their own thing. And there's just very little tolerance of like other people, like within the city, right? I mean, people are doing their own thing, and it's like, you got to elbow people out of the way on the subway and the streetcar. People are just looking for any reason to go off on you. On the other hand, it's really a great city for visitors because it's one of the most multicultural and multi-ethnic cities in North America. I mean, there's, large swaths of Chinese people and Italians and whatnot. And, you can see that throughout wherever you walk out throughout the city. I mean, there's all kinds of restaurants. And as I said, it's just this wonderful, going to sound, terribly corny here, but it's this wonderful rainbow of people from all over the world coming into one place. And so for me, it's one of the things I'm quite proud of as a Torontonian is that we're a multi-ethnic, multicultural, city. And I think that's one of the city's great assets. And so, if people are coming up from Atlanta, check the city out. Go. It's a very walkable city in a lot of ways. So check it out and really sort of experience that multiculturalism. I mean, I'm not sure, as I said, I've only been to Atlanta once, so I'm not sure if you have the same kind of thing there. But if not, then this is a great opportunity to experience other ethnicities and other cultures.
Yeah, Atlanta's very multicultural.
Okay.
Not easy to walk around in though.
Oh,
at
okay.
all.
Right.
So, one place to eat. Where would it be if you had to pick one?
Oh God. God. Well, there's this. Oh God, I can't even remember the name now. Oh damn it. There is this great Southern barbecue place not far from where I live. So I live kind of like near the Rogers Center, the stadium where the Toronto Blue Jays play. And there's a great barbecue place about a 15-minute walk away called, God, it's going to come to me.
All right. After the show, it'll come to you.
Yeah.
It'll come to me after the show.
That's okay.
But there's a great Italian restaurant called, oh God, now this is escaping my memory. Jeez, man.
Okay.
God. What the hell is that Italian place called? Jeez.
Yeah. It's gonna bug you until you get
it. It's called Tironi.
So okay, there we go.
Okay.
Fantastic Italian restaurant. Obviously, the traditional Neapolitan pizza, but it's food from southern Italy. And so there's a couple locations. So if you can get a reservation, or I don't think you even need a reservation, I highly recommend there because it's great Italian food. And my family is from southern Italy, so I can really appreciate the cuisine they put out. But there's great places to eat. I mean, we have a really vibrant Chinatown, which is essentially where I live, just south of Chinatown, and those restaurants are incredible, and they're open till like 4 a.m. And so you can get dim sum or noodles or whatever you want. So all kinds of, there's great Indian cuisine, there's great Egyptian cuisine, Ethiopian, whatever you want. We essentially have it. So, but if you fancy Italian, I would highly recommend going to Tirone. If you want a traditional Italian pizza, go to Pizza Libretto. Very good traditional Neapolitan pizza.
Sweet. Okay. That's one of the questions we have to ask. We're always looking for good places to eat. I don't know when I'm going to make it to Toronto, but now I know where to go because I do enjoy some Italian food.
There you go.
So, John, we appreciate you coming on. We want to, respect your time. We've been on for 45 minutes or so. So we absolutely appreciate your insight into Toronto, everything else. Where is the best place to find you on social media, online, wherever else?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Twitter, and it's just John Molinaro, all one word, and it's JOHNMOLINARO. So that's my Twitter handle. And then tfcrepublic.ca is the website that I run. And as I said, that's full in-depth analysis of everything Toronto FC, as well as the Canadian men's and national teams. So check out the site and hit me up on social media. And like I said, if anyone from Atlanta coming up in April, hit me up. Well, maybe we'll get a beer or something like that. I'd love to talk to you.
There you go.
5-hour drive for me. I can make it.
There you go.
He's in Ohio, by the way. He's not down in Atlanta. So
Yeah.
I didn't want you thinking he had like a teleportation device or something.
No, I would. Yeah, I wouldn't think you would be able to make the Atlanta-Toronto drive in 5 hours. So
no.
Yeah.
No, I'm breaking a lot of laws if I'm doing that.
Exactly.
John, we appreciate it. And by the way, great website too. I was on there a little bit leading up to this. It's really awesome. So for all those people listening, it's a good stuff. Definitely
thanks, I appreciate that. It's very kind of you to say.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much, man.
You're welcome.
John.
You're welcome,
Have a
Saturday.
good one.
Appreciate you.